Welcome to KM World Connect 2021. We're very excited to have so many of you with us today, and we hope you get so much out of our content with our terrific speakers and sponsors. And we are very excited to start with our keynote sessions this morning. We will have a number of speakers, and then we'll have time for you to for a discussion with them. So we hope that you will put your comments and thoughts in the chat, as well as your questions that we can feed to our speakers. Following the keynote session, you will have time in the exhibit hall, and a number of our speakers will be there to meet you and chat further. And Jay Liebowitz, our keynote speaker who's starting off, will be available in the networking area to chat more with you one-on-one. So hopefully this will be an interactive event. And following the exhibit hall break, we will have a number of streams of content, 5 different places for you to visit. And I know you can't be in them all at the same time, I don't think. So we are archiving the sessions, and following the conference, you'll be able to pick up those sessions that you weren't able to when we were live. Slides are also available on the speakers portals, so you'll be able to see those later. We have lots of hashtags for our events, and we hope that you will use social media to tell people about our exciting topics, ahas that you have, interesting quotes, whatever. And again, I want to thank all of the village that has put this event together. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first keynote speaker. Jay Liebowitz is the visiting professor at the Stillman School of Business at Seton University. He's previously taught at Harrisburg University of Science and Technology, Maryland University, Johns Hopkins University, where he was the founding program director for the Graduate Certificate in Competitive Intelligence. He's also worked at George Washington University and was the chair of Artificial Intelligence at the U.S. Army College. He was the first knowledge management officer at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. He's published over 45 books and lots of journal articles on knowledge management, analytics, financial literacy, intelligence systems, and IT management. His recent books are Data Analysis and AI, The Business of Pandemics, the COVID-19 Story, and A Research Agenda for Knowledge Management and Analytics. So please welcome our opening keynote speaker, Jay Liebowitz, to talk to us a little bit more about building organizational intelligence, knowledge sharing in the age of new technologies. Take it away, Jay.
Thanks so much, Jane. I want to welcome everyone. And I see from the chat, we have people from India and Canada and Arkansas and the UK and all around the world. So it's a shame we can't all meet in person, but hopefully this will be a nice venue and we'll get to know each other virtually. So hopefully you can see the slides. I have also posted them in our portal, so you can, after the talks, feel free to use the slides wherever you'd like. So again, I want to thank Jane for her kind introduction and allowing me to speak with you all. I want to thank the other KM World organizers as well for inviting me to speak at this year's conference. I'm a big fan of KM World. I checked my records. I think I've been speaking at KM World since 2012, and I've been writing for the KM World publication since 2001. So, wow, about 20 years. So So we go back a long time, and I'm so happy to be part of the KM World community, and to make new acquaintances with you all. So Jane had asked me to talk a little about building organizational intelligence, and to focus also on looking ahead and how we might integrate with some of the emerging technologies. So I'll try to share some insight over the next 30 minutes or so. And I just wanted to let you know that, and actually Jane made up the title. So it was really interesting because I looked back and I actually, in the year 2000, put together a book called Building Organizational Intelligence, a Knowledge Management Primer. But, you know, looking forward 21 years, I think really the secret formula is, at least for accelerating organizational intelligence, is RX equals DX, meaning that the right prescription for organizations is digital transformation. And I actually started a new book series on that topic this year through World Scientific out of Singapore. We have signed books from Wharton and Mayo Clinic and the Institute for Digital Transformation, CCL, the Center for Creative Leadership, and others. And in addition, I've been involved in terms of looking ahead for different technologies with a data analytics applications book series. And we have about 25 volumes through Taylor and Francis. And I just wanted to mention that this might interest you all, since most of you are from industry and many of you are executives. The newest book came out in May by Jennifer Priestley, who's at Kennesaw State outside of Atlanta. And it's called Closing the Analytics Talent Gap, an Executive's Guide to Working with Universities. So that might interest you, since many of you are from industry, and we would love, at through the universities, to certainly be well connected with you all. Well, in case I forget, and sorry for this shameless plug, but since we don't have a KM bookstore this year, like we normally do at KM World, these are a few of my personal favorites. If you want additional references in knowledge management and emerging areas, the first book on the left, I'm actually most proud of. It was published last November, about a year ago, and all the royalties go to the CDC Foundation to fight COVID. So, anyway, very pleased that we were able to do that. And then the second book to the left, the Research Agenda for KM and Analytics, was published in January of this year. And it's really geared for those interested in advancing the fields of knowledge management and analytics. So that's by Edward Elgar Publishers out of the UK. And I know Dave, one of our speakers, is from the UK. Well, as you know, it's been a very challenging time for all of us over the past 18 months. And I thought, looking back, KM World had a very fascinating article. It came out also about a year ago, looking at how knowledge management can help organizations, particularly during the COVID times. And you could read the quote for yourself, but they talked about 6 key areas, and you'll see that all of these areas really contribute to building organizational intelligence. And they include, for example, keep critical knowledge flowing and accessible, coach people on the shift to virtual work, bolster connections and community, support rapid innovation and business continuity, engage employees in meaningful work, and help the organization reflect and learn. And I always think of Gary Klein's pre-mortem approach, or in the KM world or community, we think of before action reviews. And so So there are many, many ways, as we know, preaching to the choir, that KM can really help many organizations in enhancing their organizational intelligence. So I wanted to kind of look back briefly just to set the stage, and then maybe talk about looking ahead. And the way I view knowledge management, even though I guess formally in terms of being coined, KM was around 80 or 81, but the first generation, I look at it as being focused on personal knowledge management. It was a little more individual based. I know we still do PKM, but again, the focus was really looking at how a person um, gathers and classifies and stores and retrieves and shares knowledge in their daily activities. So there was more of an individual focus. And then as the field started to mature, we moved into the second generation, which had more of an organizational focus. And the focus then was really on codified explicit knowledge. So, looking at the more system codification approaches to KM. And we continued moving into the third generation, where we saw, a big key to KM was really collaboration and social networking and making those connections. So again, an organizational focus, but it was more on the connection piece of KM versus the collection piece. And for me, I feel we're kind of maybe in the middle, or toward, or maybe looking toward the next generation, but we're kind of in what I say might be the fourth generation of knowledge management. And for that, I mean, we're trying to develop interesting synergies between KM and other emerging areas. So we look at, instead of software as a service, let's say knowledge as a service in automation. So a really quick example I could think of that's pretty easy is TurboTax. TurboTax by Intuit, people have used it over the years for helping you with your tax returns and completing those on an annual basis. And what TurboTax will do, it's kind of packaged, it leverages knowledge, it's packaged as a downloadable software package. And they have basic AI capabilities that can scan tax returns for problems, suggest solutions. And then there's some automation. They have some chat bots for answering specific questions to provide kind of a self-serve tax service to individuals and businesses across the country, all without a team of thousands of certified public accountants, that might typically be needed to prepare those same returns manually. So what we also have witnessed over the past many years is really trying to align KM with learning. And so this has been a major trend over the years that we have seen. And many organizations have looked at this from a variety of perspectives. I kind of like the USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development framework for KM and learning, as shown on the screen. And the framework integrates and operationalizes KM based on various experiences and lessons learned from about 50 what's called IFAD, International Fund for Agricultural Development supported projects, which were in the East and Southern Africa area. And they talk about these 3 C's that you maybe can see in the middle for integrating KM and learning. So namely commitment and capacity, cultures, systems and structures, and then continuous improvement. And then associated with those, there are 11 cornerstones that are built on critical success factors required to make KM work. And the idea is that together they form a checklist of conditions for successful KM interventions for enhancing organizational intelligence. So what we have seen over the past few years is we're trying to, as we further develop the field, it's good to have some standards so that we can provide the right rigor for our discipline. And you probably know about 3 years ago, actually exactly 3 years ago, the ISO, the International Standards Organization, through the help of Maria Levy, who chaired the Israeli KM Association in Israel, who helped create this standard. The ISO issued this KM standard 3401, and again, it doesn't go into great detail, but at least it gives, I think, some guidance to organizations. And so these are some of the key elements as shown on the screen that they highlight. So for example, top management should establish a KM policy that's appropriate to the purpose of the organization, provides a framework and guiding principles for setting, reviewing, and achieving KM objectives, includes a commitment, looking at regulatory issues, sets the expectations, looks at continual improvement of the KM system, and also to manage the balance between knowledge sharing and knowledge protection. And I believe there might be a session, I think there was one last year, maybe this year, there might be a session looking at this particular standard and how effective, it has been, whether or not, for different organizations. Well, with today's COVID situation and over the past 18 months, I was very interested in seeing how KM can provide some value-added benefits. And this is some work that was done by Covello and Hire. They're with the Institute for Risk Management. They actually had a chapter in one of my books. And we know in the KM field that it's so important that you develop interpersonal respect and trust for KM and knowledge sharing to take place. So what they've done in their work is they found to gain trust, a leader really must first express true and authentic listening, caring, empathy, and compassion. And a leader must also tell the truth and tell it well. And as shown in the figure, you see that listening and caring and empathy and compassion and honesty are all major determinants of trust. And certainly in high stress situations, such as COVID, trust is often determined in as little as 1 to 30 seconds. I also had interacted with Gabby Stern, who is the Director of Communications of the World Health Organization. And with her colleague, John Butler, at the World Health Organization in Geneva, they talk about some of the key lessons learned from the COVID experience. And you can probably see many of the KM implications behind each one. So, whether it's if you're dealing with a crisis or even if it's not under time and pressure constraints, you certainly want to, act fast. If there are errors, acknowledge the errors, get your leadership out in public, and set the narrative, engage proactively, know your audience, understand that the media is important, but also there might be certain hidden agendas at times. And again, social media is just a wonderful amplifier. So, it's been a challenging time, but since this talk touches upon KM technologies, I thought I would at least show you this slide from Nick Milton's work. This was from 2020. And from the survey, SharePoint still seems to be a favorite. I know before we started this session with my colleagues, we were talking about, you really need an ecosystem. So, one tool of technology doesn't do it all. But I thought, you might find it interesting to see what people might be using in terms of organizations, and it shows you the percentage changes from 2014 to 2017 to 2020. There were also about 40 other KM software technologies cited, and maybe there are too many solutions to choose from. I'm actually working now, I mentioned to my colleagues as part of this session, on a project for the United Nations, and we're looking at KM platforms. So I really appreciate the complexity of this selection process. Okay, so now that we have some further background, what really needs to be considered for the next generation of knowledge management? And again, for me, the key word is synergy. And KM needs to be strengthened by aligning knowledge management with some of these other emerging areas, such as the ones shown on the screen. And since we have limited time this morning, I'll just highlight a few of these. But the first I'll talk about is intuition-based decision-making, and then data analytics and visualization, I'll highlight. And then you could see some of the other areas that we just have to make sure that we as a community are also reaching out and practicing what we preach in terms of sharing our ideas and borrowing and learning from other disciplines, so that we can continue to increase the state of the art in the science behind the field of knowledge management. So let me highlight just one or two of these areas.
Actually, Jay, before you go further, someone was
Yes.
just asking you to go back to the slide before the last one and talk a little bit more about, hang on. what
Is
did
it
she
this one?
say here? Yes, I believe so. Talk a little bit more about comparative study from, comparative study from the previous slide. When do you say users 98% for SharePoint? What does that mean?
I didn't catch the last part, Jane.
When you
When
say
users-
users 98% for SharePoint, what does that mean?
Oh, I don't think it's percentage in that first column. I think, and Nick, this is coming from Nick's work
Right.
in the UK, but I think it's for that first column is referring to the number of, I believe he can correct me, but the number of organizations, this is the way I interpreted it, who were using, so for example, SharePoint customized, it says 98. So that refers to, at least from his survey, 98 organizations that were surveyed in 2020. And then you see the percentage changes from the survey that was done from 2014 to 2017 to 2020 are the latter three columns. But I don't want to misinterpret Nick. So if he's involved, please feel free to to put something in the chat or correct me. But the point I was trying to show is that, there are so many different solutions. This is just, a few of those that were highlighted from Nick's survey in terms of the ones, the KM platforms, that are being used. But there are many, many more, as we'll hear about throughout KM world. Is that helpful?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
The person
Okay.
said, thank you for the clarification.
Okay. And Nick, you can correct me if you're online. Okay, so let me first talk about intuition-based decision-making. And I actually have been doing research in this area. I kind of coined this term, so I don't know how widely acceptable it is. But I had a chance before the pandemic to go to Sweden and visit the Nobel Museum. And I happened to see this quote from one of the Nobel laureates, and it says, "I don't believe there would be any science at all without intuition." And so when I think of intuition, or an executive's intuitive awareness, for me, it's very closely aligned with experiential learning, which is one of the basic underpinnings, right, of knowledge management and knowledge sharing. Learning from each other, whether bittersweet stories or successful practices. So in the context of analytics, my mantra is analytics plus intuition equals success, where intuition certainly has a knowledge management component. So just to show you I'm not some crazy, quack professor, I thought you might relate very well, since many of you are from industry, to these two quotes from Tim Cook and Jeff Bezos, looking at the importance of intuition. And again, you can read them for yourself, but they both agree that intuition is really key for creativity and innovation, and should be an important part, of the formula for at least being a complementary part, in addition with analysis. At KPMG, there was a study done a few years ago called the Trust Gap, and they commissioned Forrester to survey, I think it was about 2,200 executives in 10 countries. And what they found was that 2/3 of the executives relied more on their intuition or their experiential learning than analytics. So I was very curious about this whole area, because in KM, we're very interested in experiential learning, and there's been such a push for data-driven or data-informed environments, that I feel that the experiential learning side is being really omitted. I mean, even Einstein has some great quotes dealing with the really valuable thing is intuition, or he had a quote saying that intuition is the sacred gift, and rationality, if you will, is the faithful servant. And unfortunately, in today's society, he felt that we were honoring the servant, if you will, instead of the gift, the sacred gift. So I was very interested in seeing how this would interplay with the whole field of analytics. And I just wanted to convey and show you a little bit of some of my research, which you might find interesting. I've been working with colleagues in Canada, Italy, Poland, and around the world over the past few years to explore how well do executives trust their intuition. And this started as a Fulbright fellowship, and we expanded our international sample to 245, mostly C-level executive responses based on our intuition and trust survey. We even did some biometrics work where we hooked up 15 CEOs in Italy to EKGs to look at heartbeat detection scores and other biometrics to measure intuitive awareness. Because from the research, if you're able to listen to your body signals better, you typically have a stronger intuitive awareness. So we even did some biometrics work as well. So these figures on this screen, they show us that the respondents from the US and Canada, they're color coded. I don't know how, hopefully you could see them well enough, but they had a higher score on the scales that correspond to what we called the big picture modelers. In other words, those with a high holistic big picture intuition style, as compared to respondents from Italy and Poland. The left figure shows us that the same respondents from the US and Canada had a lower score as compared with respondents from Poland and Italy on the scales that correspond to what we call feeling theorists, meaning that you have a high holistic abstract intuition style and a high affective intuition style, affective being kind of emotions or feelings based. The right figure shows us that the less experienced respondents had scored high scores on the scales corresponding to feeling theorists, and the scores decreased as the experience increased. So the figure, however, shows us that the respondents with more experience are the top scorers among the scales that correspond to the big picture modelers. So even though our study is not dynamic, it's not a longitudinal study, although we'd like to do more of that. Maybe we could get some of you all involved. We could conclusively say from our responses that with more experience, there is a tendency to shift from displaying characteristics of a feeling theorist to one of a big picture modeler, meaning that you're gaining and using more intuitive awareness. So, so let me just show you a few more figures. The figure on the left shows us that the respondents with more experience are the top scorers among the scales that correspond to the big picture modelers. And again, as you gain more experience, as an executive or, as you move up in the organization, hopefully you have a more strategic view, such as seeing the forest for the trees. And so we call it, being a big picture modeler. The figure on the right, we looked at gender, we looked not only at countries, we looked at industry sectors, and I'll show you coming up. But the figure on the right shows whether the respondent is a male or female, and it didn't seem to have a significant impact on whether he or she prefers intuition or what we call rationality, analysis. And this could also be confirmed by examining the average rationality and intuition scores for the males and females, which were almost pretty equal. So that was kind of interesting for us. The left figure shown here shows that a significant number of respondents from the US, Canada, and Italy fall under that 45-degree line in the graph, showing that they prefer intuition over rationality. However, the majority of the respondents from Poland, for example, fall closer to, and that's kind of, it's the green dots, but they fall closer to the 45-degree line or slightly above that, which shows their preference for rationality over intuition. The figure on the right indicates that executives with more than 10 years of experience tend to believe that their gut feelings when making strategic decisions, that they rely more on their gut feelings than on their rationale. And our research shows that the average intuition and rationality scores for each class of experience, and we can see that for people with fewer than 10 years experience, the rationality score is more than the intuition score. So the trend is reversed. As we take the case of people with more than 10 years of experience, it shows that they have a high score on intuition when compared with rationality. Let me show you just two more graphs. So we also looked at industry sector, and many of you, range from various industries. The left figure shows us that the majority of the points that lie close to the 45-degree line or above that line belong to respondents who are in the financial, insurance, banking industry, or government sector. And this reaffirms our common belief that people in the financial industry or insurance, banking, would rely on data, more so than their feelings. However, the difference in the intuition score and rationality scores in other industries like IT or consulting and professional services, education and marketing, it shows us that executives from these industries trust their gut feelings and intuition more than the data. So, and then lastly, the tables on the right just show you the rationality and intuition scores by gender, country, experience, and industry sector. So the key findings, at least from our work, and I think they tie into knowledge management, looking at experiential learning. The key findings are those shown here. And I've touched on some of these already, but certainly one's preference for different styles of intuition and analysis is dynamic. It changes as you gain more experience. You might start at more of the abstract and affective, intuitive style and move up to the what we call the inferential and the big picture, the holistic big picture style. Executives tend to adopt the big picture modeling style more so than a feeling theorist. And what we did find, which was kind of interesting, is that employee preferences for intuition styles change as they gain experience. However, we found evidence that it is possible for one's intuition style to remain kind of static and trait-like, which might inhibit those individuals from moving up from managers to, let's say, leaders in their organizations. You could see some of the other findings. We did control for years of experience. The last bullet I'll highlight, because that dealt with our biometric work. We were able to show that executives had a greater capability to develop what's called interoception, where you listen to your body signals, than the age-matched control group in a way that could not be explained by chance alone. In at the University of Cambridge, and also with colleagues in Australia, they found that hedge fund traders who relied more on their gut feeling were more successful than those who relied strictly on, on their analysis and data. So what's interesting is that researchers and practitioners are really expanding these concepts to look at what some people are calling hunch mining, kind of integrating intuition with cognitive computing, analytics, and AI. And Jim Nelson actually wrote an interesting foreword in my data analytics and AI book on this concept for those who might be interested. I'm watching the time, so I want to move ahead. For those of you, who are interested in seeing what are the necessary skill sets to become more proficient as we look toward data analytics and integrating analytics and AI with the field of knowledge management, you can take a look at this particular study that was done with one of my graduate students. And essentially, we identified 51 skill sets looking at business and soft skills, technical skills, and analytics skills. And then we vetted this with the Informs Analytics community of practitioners. And we include a spreadsheet model that might tell you whether a business analytics professional route or a data scientist route, or neither, might be most appropriate for you. Okay, so now, what do we need for KM to survive? So again, I really think we need to practice what we preach. So in other words, we have to continue to share and borrow and learn from other emerging technologies and disciplines in the spirit of advancing the current state of the art of KM. And in particular, as big data and analytics continue to grow, and you saw really since 2012, 2013, a big push for big data and analytics, there are some natural synergies with knowledge management and analytics. So for example, KM could play a key role in the management and governance of the use of big data and analytics in organizational settings. If we look at cognitive computing and AI and machine learning, as they continue to grow, KM also can play a role. So we know, like Coveo and MindBreeze with Inspire, they're all insight engines which use some AI and machine learning capabilities as part of their KM Technologies. Expert AI is a global KM company. They use AI, machine learning, and natural language processing. So you're seeing, all these integrations take place. And even DARPA in the US has a lifelong learning machines program, and they seek to develop learning systems that continuously improve with additional experience and adapt to new conditions and dynamic environments. So again, KN can play a role in many areas. And then there are other possible synergies for KM and even analytics, if you include business process mining. In fact, every year there's a industry-focused business rules conference held in the late fall, usually in October of each year. And in addition, really KM should just be part of what I call the strategic intelligence of the organization. And that is, if you look at the intersection of KM, business intelligence, and competitive intelligence, strategic intelligence or organizational intelligence, if you will, I think will develop over the years. I actually wrote a book on strategic intelligence back in 2006. So, it's interesting to see some of the same terminology coming forward. Okay, so what needs to be done? I think, if we're looking toward the next generation of KM, we have to continue to promote greater dialogue between us and the different communities. And this is being done. Even academically, there are people like Professor Suleiman Hamamdeh from the University of North Texas. He has a book out looking at KM and analytics. If you look at the conferences like KM World or the International Conference on KM, which will be, I guess, the 17th version in March of 2022 in Potsdam, Germany. All of the conferences are having sessions that look at KM synergy with other technologies. We also, I think, have to learn some of the skill sets and maybe, tools that are being applied in other domains to see how we can best use those. And in the same vein, our colleagues in the other communities must also try to develop appropriate KM skills. So we could really have that enlightenment, if you will. And then certainly we want to further investigate areas for collaboration. And it could be in many, many areas, whether it's, executive decision making or the Internet of Things or scientometrics and others. So I see I have about 3 minutes. So I'm going to go very quickly and give you kind of my 10 rules of the road where hopefully you could be successful in your KM initiatives, even though part of the talk, looks at KM technologies. That's really just a small piece of KM, as you know. It's really the process, the people, the cultural parts. And so let me very quickly give you my 10 rules of the road in order to help ensure KM success. The first is, make sure you have a senior champion and align your KM strategy with your organizational strategy goals and objectives. And if you don't do this, you might end up like this car in a crash. Second, make sure you develop a well-designed KM implementation plan, looking at people and culture and process and technology. From the research, there are 2 main reasons why KM efforts fail. The first is misalignment of the KM strategy with the organization's strategic mission and goals. And the second is, just having a poorly developed KM implementation plan. Third, develop a formal knowledge retention strategy. Start from day 1 of the employee's lifespan with the organization. And again, actually, I've been doing some work with the US Navy over the past 2 summers, looking at knowledge retention and developing appropriate SOPs. And again, we have to start early in the process of an employee's tenure with the organization. Otherwise, a lot of that might be lost. Fourth, maybe incorporate KM as part of one of your existing strategies, so it's not a standalone effort. And many organizations have done this, whether under the HR side, or workforce development, or strategic planning, or quality management. Fifth, try to be very thoughtful in your approach. Of course, I'm an academic, but we try to be very conservative and applying appropriate methods to ensure that we're getting the best outcomes. 6, align your KM approaches to fit your organizational culture. So again, make sure you have that proper alignment. You want to celebrate the successes and bring in the bittersweet stories. And you want to also think about having the right metrics. There are system output and outcome measures. You really want outcome measures. As a professor, I'm not so interested in teaching outcomes. I want to know about student learning outcomes. And 9th, don't force fit the technology. Again, if you only know a hammer as your only tool, then every problem looks like a nail. So, make sure you don't force fit technology to your problem. And then lastly, for me, KM is just one part of your strategic intelligence. And it looks like I'm just about out of time. I have some additional slides, so you can always view those online, but I want to thank you for listening, and I'm happy to, in the Q&A session, respond to any of your comments and thoughts and questions. So thanks a lot, Jane.
Thank you, Jay. That was great. Great way to start us off, and to finish with the 10 rules. That's really cool. One of the things you mentioned, the ISO standard. We do have a chat on Wednesday following the sessions. We have some informal chats, community chats, which we usually do in the bar, but these ones are online. And one of those topics is the ISO standard. So if you do want to talk more about that, make sure that you're there. Each of those communities will have a facilitator to help the discussion. So that's terrific, Jay. Lots of people are commenting already, but we're going to move on to our next speaker. We are going to welcome Dave Clarke. Dave is the co-founder and CEO of Synaptica Group of Companies, providers of enterprise software solutions for knowledge organization and discovery. He is a longtime supporter of KM World. He has served on the authoring committee of the 2005 version of the US standard for controlled vocabularies. He leads research and development at Synaptica, including software solutions for taxonomy and ontology management, text analytics and auto categorization, image annotation and indexing, as well as linked data management. Dave is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts in London and a leadership fellow of St. George's House, Windsor Castle. So please welcome Dave Clarke to talk to us a little bit more about ontologies for enterprise auto categorization. Take it away, Dave.
All right, thank you so much, Jane, and great job, Jay, on your talk just up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about ontologies and auto categorization, and really as taxonomy gets more sophisticated and the scale of ontologies gets bigger, that's really going to be the focus of what I'm going to be talking about today. So let me just move on. So just a briefest word on Synaptica. We are a software company. We've been around for 25 years plus, and we, in essence, we help people to organize, categorize, and discover enterprise knowledge. Organization is all about taxonomy and ontology. Categorization is what we're going to focus on today, which is how do you get taxonomy and ontology into content. And discovery is, of course, the benefit when you've done those things in search experiences and discovery experiences. And the way we do this is we do this with knowledge graphs. So my talk topics I'm going to cover very, very briskly. I'm going to cover a compare and contrast between smaller enterprise-specific taxonomies and big knowledge graphs and ontologies, and explicit rules-based categorization and machine learning-based categorization. These two things are separate, but there are some correlations as you start to get bigger between what is suitable and appropriate methodologies. So basic principles that are common to any auto-categorization solution is what I'll start off with. And let me just go here. So for me, the end game of taxonomy and the end game of auto-categorization is simply to help people find the needle in the haystack. Whether it's through search, whether it's through browse, whether it's through recommendations, we are here to help people find things. And the techniques that we employ to do that are evolving quite rapidly. Some of the things that auto-categorization can help with is it can improve both the recall and the precision of search by harmonizing the semantics of the terminology that people use to search and the language that you find in content. It also can help people to find what is the most relevant or salient, the most standout bit of content relative to their searches, and it can provide content recommendations. I'll skip this slide, but I mean, it'll be there in the deck, but language is very elastic. One thing can mean multiple one thing can be described by multiple words, and one word can describe multiple things. And it's out of that Tower of Babel phenomenon that we have challenges in natural search through full text, and where categorization and taxonomy has a role to play. I want to just briefly talk here about the distinction between tagging and categorization. So semantic tagging is about identifying the many. It's about finding basically all the concepts that are mentioned within the full text of a document. And we do this through concept labels, through rich taxonomy, through synonyms, through disambiguators, etc. As distinct, categorization is about identifying the few. It is about identifying the one or two concepts and named entities that describe the general aboutness of a whole document. So tagging and categorization, two things, complementary, but they serve a different purpose. And when we get into categorization, we're really using things like term frequencies, but also where you find them in the document, the relevancy of document zones, and a lot can be determined from semantic proximity and really mining the knowledge graph of the ontology to help discover what is the aboutness of content. So let's first have a look at auto-categorization for small enterprise taxonomies. And small is only a relative term here to the next section where we're going to look at big knowledge graphs. So small enterprise taxonomies could be a few hundred, it could be tens of thousands of concepts. It's still relatively small by comparison to the big knowledge graphs. So scale-wise, enterprise taxonomies tend to be in the range of the few hundred to a few thousand concepts. Also, the subject domains for enterprise taxonomies tend to be quite proprietary. They're focused on the specific business topics and named entities that are found in enterprise content management systems. Structurally, they can be flat lookup lists, i.e. just control terminologies. They can be simple hierarchies, taxonomy hierarchies, and they can be interrelated taxonomy schemes or facets. A small enterprise taxonomy example, obviously, I can't show you the sorts of proprietary client data that we work with, so I'm going to use something that is illustrative of what a small scale enterprise taxonomy looks like in size and structure. And this is the IPTC media topics. So this is a taxonomy of about 1,200 concepts, 5-tier hierarchy, terms, definitions, etc. This one is multilingual, and it's used by a lot of companies who are indexing any kind of news. So both news media companies and also businesses and enterprise that are consuming news media as part of their business intelligence. So IPTC is what we're going to have a look at. What we have done here is we pulled IPTC into our taxonomy management tool, which is called Graphite. And so that basically converts this into a SCOS-based taxonomy model. And then in order to do auto-categorization, we extend the model. So what we have is predicates in the ontological schema for capturing information that the auto-categorization process can use. So we can add positive keywords, negative context keywords. We can also include regular expressions. So we can have quite complex logical expressions. But the key thing here about doing this is the rules are really right front and center in the taxonomy management system. So if I land on a particular concept, I can go and see and edit its business rules. They are essentially very transparent. The result of this is, so if we have a look at the semantic tagging, this is basically taking an article, processing it through the auto-categorization pipeline, looking at all of the IPTC concepts in the taxonomy, and identifying the many mentions that there will be throughout that document. We can additionally use NLP extraction to identify people, locations, and organizations. These are things that may not be in the taxonomy, may not be known to the taxonomy, but they're identifiable through NLP. As for categorization, the categorization is looking for the few, it's looking for the most relevant concepts. And this is going to use the frequency, the document zones, the semantic proximity of the ontology to go and determine what this particular document is about at a high level. Now let's have a look at the larger scale. So here we're going to look at auto-categorization when you've got big knowledge graphs and ontologies. So the scale of entities here can be millions, and the subject domains are going to be where you have millions of entities. So some of the linked data cloud obviously provides some of the most ready accessible data sets here. You have things like DBpedia, Wikidata, GeoNames, which is an exhaustive locations data set. Gleaf, which is global legal entities, so basically companies and organizations. And then you've got specialized licensable sets like eClass, which is an e-commerce products and services ontology. Structurally, these large, big knowledge graphs can still be simple, so they can be simple lists, but they can also be taxonomic in nature, and they can be much more complex in terms of the semantic schema. They can also include both control vocabularies and non-control vocabularies in these data sets. Same process can be run through the same content. So I'm using, say, the same example here, but we're processing this through a big graph analytics auto-categorization process. And what this is finding is it's finding the entities from the big graph and embedding links. So these entities in the big graph will link out to things like the DBpedia origin or the GeoNames origin, but they're still identifying in this particular case, the specific inline mentions of entities. And again, we can move into more of the categorization. So categorization, the examples I'm using here are from our technology partner Ontitext, who have a text analysis system called Now, which is essentially a big knowledge graph with millions of entities in the graph produced by DBpedia and Wikidata, and NLP pipelines to do the people, organizations, and locations. So you can go to now.ontitext.com and have a look at how this works as an advanced big graph categorization service. The workflow for doing big graph categorization is quite a bit different than the workflow that we were looking at earlier for rules-based enterprise taxonomy categorization. So with the rules-based, we were right in the taxonomy management system. We were looking at terms in the taxonomy management system, and we were adding rules to those terms to help disambiguate or increase the recall of those terms as they're searched through text. Process for big graph and ML based is a little bit different. So we can have enterprise taxonomies in the picture, but we're also bringing in big graph data sets like the Wikidata GeoNames. And we're not going to be able to create human editable rules on millions of entities. So the dynamic has to be a little bit different in this workflow. And the ML approach stands out as the best approach. So here, there is the annotation of gold standard training sets of content against the ontology and the taxonomies, human in the loop learning to feedback and training to produce an acceptable level of indexing before production categorization pipelines are implemented. This is just an illustration of some of the human in the loop feedback there. And let me just briefly mention here, big graphs enable deeper inferencing. So here you've got one piece of content may be indexed to certain nodes in the taxonomy and ontology. Another piece of content may be indexed to similar but different, but the inferencing is possible by all the connectivity of the big graph and the ontological schema behind the big graph. And this essentially allows you to deliver content similarity and content recommendations in a more refined way than is possible without that big graph inferencing. Getting to the end here, just want to mention really pros and cons to these two different approaches. So and there really are pros and cons to both of these. It's not like there's one clear winner. So rules-based allows you to do rapid development, put in a taxonomy, rapidly develop rules. The rules are transparent and they yield very explainable results. These are big selling points for this approach. Also, they can rapidly adapt to changing taxonomy topics. On the machine learning side, the statistical linguistic analysis learns by example. Big pro, you don't need to go and manually develop explicit rules on all of your concepts. You can do more sophisticated tagging and categorization. But some of the cons are you have to go and create gold standards. You have to do all this human training. And there is a little bit less flexibility because as the taxonomy topics change, you need to retrain the machine learning to handle that. So most suited to is really the end of this. Smaller taxonomies probably favor the rules-based approach. Business-specific knowledge domains favor the rules-based approach. And rapidly changing taxonomy topics are more easily addressed through rules-based. Machine learning, however, most suited to large graph data sets and knowledge domains with open data resources and perhaps relatively static topics. Now, there are hybrids that are possible. It's custom to achieve this, but you can actually have a best of both worlds and blend these two different methodologies. And that brings me to the end. Thank you very much for having a look. If you want to learn more about what Synaptica does in the with Graphite and our order categorization capabilities, there will be a brochure in our exhibition booth. Thank you very much, Jane.
Thanks so much, Dave. Great timing. I've trained you well and you do a good job. I love that final slide too with the comparison. And I know people will want to talk with you in your exhibit booth after our discussion later. So without further ado, I'm going to move on to our next speaker, Scott Parker. Scott is the Director of Product Marketing for Synaptica, an organization where he's been since 2013. And prior to that, he was with Vivissimo. He's going to talk to us today about tying knowledge to action, strategies for a modern digital workplace. So please join us, Scott.
Thank you, Jane. It's nice to be back here at KM World, albeit virtually. I think this is my 5th year, if I remember correctly, speaking. And the topic for today should resonate with most. It's really acknowledging that organizations' knowledge and expertise are probably more siloed than ever before, and often shared very informally, although that's changing. And harnessing this ever-growing content to extract kind of the golden nuggets of knowledge and expertise, connecting people, it's crucial to driving innovation. A lot of our customers at Synaptica are focused on innovation excellence. So in the next 14 minutes or so, we're going to explore how intelligent search and an intelligent search platform underpins the modern workplace. So the workplace, as I mentioned, is becoming increasingly chaotic. We've got people at the core, but they're navigating differently, and they're interacting with information in different ways. By our count, employees on average each have about 35 job critical applications they use on a daily basis. I'll reference that list of sources from Nick Milton that Jay brought up. And the solution to a lot of this chaos is encapsulated by this fashionable term, digital workplace. And digital workplace has many definitions. And the one here that I'm showing from Gartner, it's one of the best that I've seen, in that it talks about, raising engagement and agility and exploiting those consumer-oriented styles and technologies, the things we use kind of outside of work. And not a day goes by at Synaptica where we don't have a conversation about digital workplace. And that's because we provide an intelligent search platform that organizations use to make their digital workplace intelligent. And these organizations, they want to realize value quickly. So they're looking for a comprehensive and packaged technology to help them move quickly without sacrificing context, without sacrificing quality. And by adopting a complete and flexible platform, what these organizations effectively do is they shield themselves from the cost and complexity of IT integration. It also means they don't have to purchase a point solution whenever new business requirements arise. They can leverage the platform capabilities to configure these so-called insight applications that are specifically aligned with business goals. So supporting the user's intuition. Jay talked a bit about rationality versus intuition. By leveraging platform capabilities, the insight apps that these organizations configure, they provide that intuitive and contextual access to the information that's critical to keep them in the flow of their work. In some ways, that's really our goal, is to keep knowledge workers and employees in knowledge-intensive organizations in the flow of their work. So as organizations increasingly shift to this digital work, they need that intuitive contextual access for their employees, and they need it to integrate with team collaboration and digital workplace apps. I saw in the chat, people were talking about Microsoft Teams. That's a big one. The Google Workspace is a big one. And as you can see from these survey results, I'll talk about the survey in a minute, respondents placed embracing what they called AI-powered search and discovery tools only second to these collaboration tools, which really acknowledges the need to help employees sift through these masses of information and linking up to expertise within their organization. So I think it helps to kind of take a step back and think about, well, when don't workplaces work? Well, it's usually when there are disconnected systems that require people to have to request access and then go into each system separately, kind of find what they need, analyze it, and then make their decisions accordingly. It can be very time consuming. It can even be a big risk factor if they can't find the information or they analyze it properly in time. And because of this and the growing masses of data, knowledge gets lost, it gets buried, and it's critical for the decision-making that people need to do for innovation. And if they can't use systems and make decisions quickly, then they can't communicate effectively within their team. They can't communicate effectively outside of their immediate team members, and overall the business suffers. So I'll talk a little bit more about each of these. So to understand the problems around disconnected systems and around information access, Synaptica partnered with APQC. I'm sure most of you are familiar. We surveyed over 200 CIOs and CTOs, and half of them said there's an incredible amount of confusion around where information is stored. And the main reason is that systems are disconnected. They talked about employees spending upwards of 18 hours per week searching for information. And our takeaway is, in a world where companies are expected to move quickly and exceed customer expectations, often the opposite happens. So if you reflect more recently on the past 18 months or so, the physical separation of the workforce can directly impact knowledge loss. Back when we were all in the office, we were together, we were better equipped to ask our colleagues where something is or who might know about a given topic. And it's just not the case right now. It takes more time to identify where things are and where people are. And that's especially the case when we try to go outside of our own teams. So how are employees responding to this? Well, Microsoft shared some Teams usage data since the February of last year, right? And what we see is that employees started relying on and communicating with team members online more than ever to do their jobs. That makes sense. But they also saw that cross-team collaboration drastically decreased and is staying at lower levels. So you might wonder why. Well, in the hybrid, more distributed workforce, we don't always know who's working on what and who has the information that's going to help us do our job. And even when we do, it takes much longer to collaborate effectively across teams than when we were all kind of working in the office. So when employees struggle to communicate across teams and collaborate, the business value that separates the leading companies from the rest, it really is stark, right? And it includes things like driving innovation, delivering the best customer experience, creating a satisfied workforce, avoiding risk, driving growth. So this is an incomplete list, but these are the business value drivers that we see driving an efficient workforce. And the reality is that one department or team can't do it all. It's a team effort. Every single employee has to do it, and they have to do it to compete in their market. So where does intelligent search fit into the picture? What role does it play in making the modern digital workplace work? Well, we've seen that when it's done properly, intelligent search can synthesize all the enterprise content and all the enterprise data in all formats and all languages into this accessible and useful information. And it does so securely and at scale. So what do I mean by synthesizing? Specifically, we're talking about enriching the information and connecting it along topical lines. And what Dave talked about is very useful, right? We endorse the use of taxonomies and ontologies and knowledge graphs for sure. What Dave says about the improving precision and recall is true in my experience. I've been in enterprise search for over 10 years. Anyway, the resulting corpus that's been sort of unified with these techniques is the thing that equips the enterprises to accelerate innovation and achieve the innovation and the agility. So I said I would talk a little bit about the strategies to tie knowledge to action that makes the search engine or the search experience intelligent. Let me touch on a few of these, but first, it's really not, intelligence within a search experience is not powered by a single strategy. It's really a cohesive combination of strategies. So end users are going to perceive an intelligent search experience when the solution in front of them can accommodate their questions and their queries and connect them with that collective knowledge and provide them with the relevant information. IT personnel and search administrators, people like that, they're going to perceive an intelligent search experience when they have something that's reliably secure and that's accommodating when it comes to the deployment options and the ability to ingest content and data from diverse sources. So different perspectives there. Let's touch on a couple of them. Let's look at strategies for connecting to systems to bring together that disparate content and data. The key to connectivity is the connector, but not all connectors are equal. So we've got product connectors tailored to specific applications and repositories. got general purpose connectors, which are easily adaptable to multiple situations. You've got these programmable connectors that interact with APIs and specific technology protocols. And then you've got these sort of fully custom connectors that can be built using a dedicated software development kit. And at Synaqua, we maintain the attitude, and it's been our experience, that there's always a way to index content or data source. And the decision path goes something like this. Is there a built-in connector for that source? That's a product connector. If not, can we access it via a web interface, or can we export to some standard format? That's a general purpose connector. If not, does the source have a REST API, or can we access the raw database? That's a programmable connector. And if not, right, you've got the SDK for the custom connector. So let's look at relevance, another part of the overall strategy. An effective relevance model for enterprise search looks at searchable information in stages or layers. Imagine kind of a pyramid like this, right? Where the first layer is the broad base of language itself. And search takes place in a given language, after all. So the search solution has to understand that that language as well as it can. It helps the search engine to know that my right arm refers to a body part, not my preferred weapon, for example. And as you progress up the layers of relevance, the search engine's results improve. If you go beyond language, there are characteristics of documents. There's the document context, such as whether it comes from an authoritative source. There's the business context. The model starts to then shift from content-centric elements to more user-centric approach. User identity matters in the relevance approach. Who's asking the question? That might mean a lot in terms of relevance. The user's role in the organization or his or her location could affect the search results. And as the advanced search solutions get more advanced, they can start to ferret out the intent behind a query, right? And they can start to intuit what is meant, not just what is actually expressed. Enrichment, right? So today, most applications have an embedded search that operates on keywords search. And I'm not going to get into this slide in too much detail because of time constraints, but it's important to realize that with NLP, a user can type in a query with natural language. They can use plurals, pronouns, verbs in any forms. It makes the search more flexible, and it makes it kind of more intelligent. It's like interacting almost with another human with the way we express words and thoughts. And it's important to note that natural language processing tells the search engine what to search for, but it doesn't give the search engine an understanding of the user's intention. And for that, we need to go a step further into something called query intent detection, which is another session. We don't have time for that today. And I guess one last strategy we have time to explore is usability. It's the most critical strategy. And it kind of revolves around this vision that we're having the software adapt to the users rather than the users adapting to the software, right? So usability requires personalization. It can take a variety of forms. You can see some of the sources of personalization here. These are all the types of sources of personalization that Synaqua supports. Each of the sources can drive one or more of the outcomes. We can talk a little bit about that afterwards, and we'll make the slides available. And I guess I'll leave you with this, that the information-driven organization means that employees spend less time searching for what they need or making sense of the data. In order to be information-driven, this kind of Synaqua's tagline, organizations need actionable information, and they need it presented in context to surface insights, inform decisions, elevate productivity. So this reduces the cognitive burden of employees at the individual level, and it reduces the aggregate burden on the organization in terms of what employees are trying to accomplish in the modern digital workplace. So that's it for now. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and I will see you in the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Scott. That was great. I love that information driven slide that you finished off with there. And we have questions in the chat. Keep them coming. I'm making a note of them, and I'll bring them up in our discussion coming shortly. But our next speaker is Chip Gettinger, and he is the VP of Global Solutions Consulting at RWS. And he manages a team who works with customers in maximizing global digital content using RWS technologies. He has experience working with customers to develop digital content strategies, business requirements, change management, and technology adoption for the structured content management using semantic AI. He works closely with industry standards, partners, and customers in technology and solutions deployments. So please welcome Chip to talk to us a little bit more about intelligent content.
Thank you, Jane. And it's always great to go last in the presenters because I can really benefit by the expertise presented here this morning, for me at least, in the afternoon for many of you. So I'm really excited to be here today virtually. I wish we were in Washington as well, but hey, here we are. So what I'd like to do, as Jane mentioned, I work with a lot of RWS customers, and I'd like to talk with some of the ideas and concepts that we see in deployments around intelligent content, and really draw on a lot of what Scott and Dave and Jay have talked about today. So when we start to look at some of this, first thing is I'd like to talk about RWS. So this is my second year at KM World, and last year I was part of SDL, and since then we have merged in with RWS as a larger company. We're actually based out of the UK, out of the London area, and I work in our content technologies part of the company. We're also a big provider in language technologies and translation and services and so forth. So it's a very exciting part of our business. We tend to work with some of the more complex organizations and customers in the world. I've been here 13 years, and hardly a week goes by that I'm not surprised by some complex content problem. So really, when we start to think about the organization, what are some of the ongoing content needs? Really what I'd like to think about and talk about today is around making authors and editors more productive. Because obviously we make them more productive, we're going to improve customer and employee experience. And we always have to think about managing future demands, that digital demand that Jane mentioned in my background and so forth. Ironically, many organizations I work with are very PDF centric. We all know the problems and challenges with PDFs, the ability to not search and display them on mobile devices and so forth. So one of the first things I start talking about is really modernizing your content operations and look at how can you deliver a better customer and employee experience in this digital transformation experience. One of the things I've also learned is many times employees really should be treated as customers. Scott, you had some good references on insurance, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit myself. But the idea then is to automate some of these business processes, and this requires some centralization or knowledge hub as you might have with some built intelligence. And finally, I'm going to promote the use of structured content along with taxonomy, smart taxonomy tagging to increase the quality and the relevance that we've been talking about today regarding search results and so forth. So if we look at the role of intelligent content in our business, really what we're talking about is providing knowledge as a service. And the speakers this morning have really talked nicely about knowledge as a service. And this really does require personalization and contextualization. We also look at highly structured content to provide this. And finally, in our industry, we hear things which we call a headless CMS, which is a term I really love. But the idea is to be able to provide knowledge out using queries like GraphQL and other sorts of ways to provide that unique personalized experience via dynamic delivery. Obviously, this leads to much improved findability and insights. One of our customers is California Casualty, and I've worked with them. And Susan there often talks about findability of content versus just search, because many of her people in her organization they want to navigate, they want to find content. So being able to have intelligence around insights and knowledge graphs are really important. And also we need to think about the Internet of Things and how people look and navigate information, because we may be talking to devices to find out information and so forth, whether it's Siri, Alexa, or similar. In business applications, I'm seeing this more. And finally, to harp on the intelligent knowledge hub idea that I talked about earlier, is we really have these areas for collaboration. The most exciting area I see is around customer self-service. Another customer of ours is HP, and they've built an entire troubleshooting architecture around this area, around this technology and approaches to really provide self-service for customers and troubleshooting with printers and so forth. And finally, this gives us the automation and consistency that we're all looking for, that I saw some earlier questions come up in the chat, which is very important in our business. So how do you look at activating some of these ideas? The first thing I look for is identifying high value information or content within your organization. And typically this is long-standing content. There's high risk associated with if it gets out of date, and it's critical to your business operations and sales. So, you know, this type of information then typically needs to reside in a centralized area and have taxonomies to provide this single source of truth. Earlier, we were talking about unified collaboration as well as a really key part. Many times the authors, reviewers, editors that we work with are distributed. They can even be in different countries, let alone in different states. And to provide this automated kind of taxonomy tagging helps to establish the information governance. And finally, we look at structured content at the core. And this structured content provides the atomic approach that we need to be able to dissect and properly display information. It also is format free. Earlier, I'd mentioned PDFs. Many organizations I work with need to have information that is very rich with metadata and so forth, but be able to display or be spoken wherever it's required. So this really does require semantically rich information. And finally, having this tech connect provides that core capability and so forth. So really the product that I work with here at RWS is called Tridion. It's a content management platform. And the idea then is to build the semantic layer and provide semantics around the different applications and so forth that have been very well discussed around search applications, discovery, and other aspects and so forth. One of the other areas that we tend to focus on is how can we make authors who are creating content more productive? So being able to do what we call a smart tagger capabilities and reuse analyzer to be able to find duplicate and repeat content. Because one of the big challenges our customers have is they need to translate these to multiple languages. I work with organizations that can translate 25, 30, 50 languages, and they need to be able to apply these kind of rules across different languages. Of course, they need to be able to understand the localization aspects required for each country. That's another topic for another day. So really what we've looked at RWS then is designing a very intelligent smart tagging assistance. This is an authoring tool that we have called DraftSpace. And what I see on the left-hand side is the actual content being written as small components or topic of information. And this is that atomic approach that as an author, I have the ability to have very small components of information. On the right-hand side are the smart tags that were chosen by my taxonomy. And I have the ability as an author to go in and interact with these. And this is done using semantic AI. So we're able to look at the richness of the content along with the other aspects that are more typical with taxonomies to be able to provide a controlled environment for more accurate, straightforward, and repeatable types of smart tagging approaches. This also helps build out our information model that as I get into more delivery of employee or customer portals, that kind of knowledge hub that I mentioned, is the ability to decouple this And I think it was Dave that mentioned some ideas earlier that I really loved around auto-classification and harmonization. The idea is that we can categorize information, and then it can be much easier to personalize that for the particular audience that we're working on and so forth. And even further on, we can start to understand the sentiments and the relationships between different content and so forth. I have further examples of this to get into different languages and how in different countries I may display this for, like, for example, Spanish in Mexico versus Spanish in Spain and so forth. But I only have a few minutes here. I didn't want to get into this too much. So really, if we look at semantic personalization, then it is possible to add this value in stages. So kind of back to this practical approach of how can we, what are some of the methods that we can look at and so forth for results, is really to look at low risk to add in your high value. So I like to think about adding in the semantic intelligence into your content, the structured content approach, along with some of the tagging. And then we can get into broader user roles and groupings of users and so forth. And this is very common in organizations that, for example, we talked about insurance. You can have more advanced experienced users who know exactly what they want to go to. You can also have newer customer or users and employees who don't know where to go. We have a big customer of ours who's in auditing, accounting auditing and so forth. And they found these roles to be very critical because they also have legal implications because, of course, this information is audited and so forth. Then we can get into more advanced things of looking at session data and cookies and so forth that allow us to provide this personalization and so forth. So kind of wrapping up here before we get into the Q&A. And so really the smart tagging with structured content, then it allows you to achieve goals with semantic AI along with your smart tagging and recommendations. The tagging at a component or this topic level dramatically increases the accuracy of the ultimate search results that you'll see. And this is all achieved through semantic AI with the ability to have human interaction. Many of us look at AI as not perfect. So it's good to have human interaction to be able to check and see what's going on and so forth. And then finally, the ability to manage very sophisticated global taxonomies for distributed use cases. This is kind of idea that globally, our customers and employees are going to want to see information differently, even though it can be the same to us in our back-end operations and so forth. So with that, Jane, I'd like to thank everyone and hand it back to you for the Q&A.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Chip. That was really, really good. And I'm thrilled to see the themes that have been coming along here. And particularly the digital workplace that Scott talked about. And come on back, Scott and Dave and Jay, so we can have our discussion. But Scott talked about the digital workplace, and following our break in the exhibit hall, we have a whole day to talk about those kinds of topics. And Jay mentioned about how KM and learning are sort of coming together. And again, we have a stream of talks around learning. And the third, most of you have hit upon the people side of things. So the culture and the people, and that's the other stream of sessions that we will have following the exhibit, as well as taxonomy bootcamp. And that's a topic that's come up again with our speakers. So it's wonderful to have things just organically come together and with those wonderful themes. And interesting in terms of networking, et cetera, and understanding what's going on in organizations. I think it was, who was it, Scott, who talked about the decrease in cross-team collaboration over this COVID period and not so sure what other people are doing. And that was a perfect example with Jay talking about his project with the UN, and one of our audience is another member from the UN who said, "What?" And so Jay was able to talk to him about who in the organization he was working with. And that's the kind of thing that you're talking about, Scott, isn't it? The cross team. And maybe that's a topic we might want to talk more about a little bit now. Anybody else have comments? Oh, the sun is shining on me. How about that? Any other comments around cross team collaboration and ways to sort of move forward better with that?
Maybe one thing, Jane, I did see somebody in the chat talking about KCS, and I just wanted to sort of endorse that as well. Knowledge Centered Support, I believe, is what it stands for. But that there are, it's probably talked about at this conference a bit, but there are, methodologies and paradigms like that which really help to put knowledge in the center. And I think that helps, that's kind of what we're all talking about in some ways. That kind of helps to bring those teams together, because once you see that you're working on the same thing, or maybe have a similar background or whatever, that's how teams are built, both explicitly and even implicitly, if it's just a short question or something like that. I think it's important.
Yep, for sure. One of the things that many of you talked about too is the whole ecosystem of platforms for KM, that there isn't one magic bullet for your organization that's going to bring that knowledge into the flow and help innovation and cross fertilization and all of those things happen. So any other sort of comments around the ecosystem of platforms that you'd like to comment on before we go to another question or comment?
I would say, Jane, that industry standards really help across platforms. I think all of us as vendors and experts have to live in an ecosystem, especially with RWS. So for example, many of the scopes was mentioned earlier around the W3C standard and so forth, around how taxonomy ontologies can be formed. Those are so critical to businesses. Many organizations I work with don't fully appreciate those standards. They want to go off and build a proprietary approach or their own approach, and we know what ends up happening with that. So it's working in that ecosystem. It's not easy though. I'm not going to pretend it is, but having that consciousness really does help in that employee customer experience.
Yeah,
good answer. Chip, that might be the downside of the digital workplace consumerization. We're all used to kind of downloading an app when we need it, and sure. As that type of thing, we get app proliferation, right? And there's really no stopping it. People are gonna use what they find useful, right?
Right. Good point.
Right. I had one question for Dave that came up. For auto categorization, what is a typical training set of content? Is it hundreds or thousands of documents or content pages, or is it a percentage of the complete set of content?
Thanks for the question. So it will depend on the scale of the data set for sure, but you're not going to be less than 1,000 documents in a training set, and probably 10,000. It really does depend on what is the overall the overall scale of the content. And the other thing that's even more critical is heterogeneity and homogeneity. How different is the content in the content repository structurally, semantically? Because the training set needs to have examples that are representative of the different types of things that the system is going to encounter. So there's no one answer to that, but you're definitely not dealing with a few hundred things from which to learn. You are looking sort of 1,000, 10,000, and it really depends on the diversity and scale of the data.
Yep. All righty. And Scott, a specific question for you too was, do you have any recommendations for mapping user experience by persona?
Yeah, I saw that. I like the answer too. I mean, we work with, we even have a partner, I'll shout out to Left Right Mind, who we worked with on a client site. They're a user experience design firm. And that really is the way to start it, because you have to understand what their needs are before you can map anything within technology. You know, once you do that and you understand what their roles are, then I had that one slide showing kind of the sources of personalization, and knowing what those people, who they are and what they're after is critical to personalized relevance. And it's not just the relevance algorithm, it's the way you set up the Insight app, it's the whole user experience, the interpretation of the words, you know, the vocabulary that's used. So it's definitely useful to have somebody with a UX expertise in the mix.
Jay, you talked about the various generations of KM, and I really like that, from sort of the beginning, the third to the fourth now, in bringing around the AI and machine learning and Internet of Things. And I liked your Internet of People too. And I wondered, did you want to comment a little bit more about that? And then we'll see what the other speakers have to say about that. And then I'll ask you panelists if you have any questions for each other. So Jay.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. And thanks to all the speakers. Very interesting sessions. So yeah, so I think we're kind of maybe toward the end of this fourth generation. I mean, there's still quite a bit of work to be done, but we already have heard talks with using semantic AI and the semantic tagging and machine learning approaches, and you know, natural language processing techniques. So for me, you know, a critical part is how do we advance the current state of the art, you know, and what's ahead. And you know, we've talked about technology, but I think we all know as KMers that it's really the people, the culture, the process, you know, components, the strategy that really make KM to be successful. And technology is important, you know, as an enabler for KM. But I just want to, you know, emphasize that we really have to continue to look at the process and the people components. I know one of the questions brought up in the chat dealt with engagement, employee engagement. And that's so important, you know, in today's environment. I mean, we're going through what's called the Great Resignation period over the past, you know, year and a half. And there have been studies done where 78% of employees globally indicated that the pandemic has negatively affected their mental health. So, you know, the people part of the equation is so important. So I'm so glad, Jane, that, you know, in your other streams, we'll be highlighting some of these areas as well.
Yes, that was a good point. I was going to bring up that question and ask everyone if they did have tips for the training and orienting of users to platforms, so the engagement. So any tips?
Well, I would just say, I mean, that vision of bringing the computing power into the human space, it's much more compelling than trying to, I think we've all tried, you know, maybe as a civilization at points to get people to go into the computing space. And some of us survived in there and adapted to syntax. But if we're really going to make this work and move forward, it has to be the other way around. And we're heading in that direction. Yeah.
Yep. Knowledge in the flow. That's what we're working towards, right? And the tools will support that, the people and the processes, exactly. So that's really cool. Now I wanted to ask, do you have questions for each other?
I have one quick question, kind of being, you know, the outsider a little bit of the panel, and my colleagues are much more engaged, you know, on the technology side. But I was just curious, you know, in your experience, what are some of the key lessons learned that that you have gained over the years in terms of gaining acceptance to the various KM, you know, platforms that are being used? You know, what are the key drivers that you see in gaining success in what you all are delivering?
I'll go first, Jay. I think one of the key things is the quality of the content itself. You know, we all are familiar with legacy content, more modern content, and understand the original intent of that content, and then what's the new intent for that content. So earlier I'd mentioned, you know, print or PDF driven content may not work well, and so forth. So it's making sure an organization understands that you have to improve the content quality, or you have to do the auto tagging differently, or so forth. But you know, content itself has a life cycle, and have to understand where that is. I wish in a perfect world we could all rewrite the content, but that doesn't always happen.
Maybe I'll take a little bit of a different tact, and I, you know, come from a little more of a consulting background before I get into product marketing, Jay. I think that you have to balance that top-down approach with, you know, making sure the organization wants these tools and has a pretty good idea of why they want the tools, you know, kind of the business case argument. And the bottoms up approach, which is not trying to build the ivory tower, right? Building something that works, kind of that idea of a minimally viable solution, and then using that success to kind of iterate up towards the big, you know, top down goals. I think if you get that right, you're well on your way to getting you know, the business problem solved and getting the adoption you need to actually execute on it. Yep.
Great.
Yeah.
Dave, any comments? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to second Scott's just comment there. I mean, I think, you know, don't let the best be the enemy of the good. Really do, you know, do good things, iterate. One of the other things I would mention in terms of success or failure of projects is getting a diverse set of stakeholders early on in a rollout of a tool. So when we're working with a new client, we don't want to only see the taxonomists and the content managers in the room. We want to see people who are designing the user experiences of how that content surfaces, whether that's in the public-facing websites, internal portals, etc. You've got to have stakeholders from IT, from systems, from search, as well as the people who probably knocked on our door as a taxonomy ontology tool provider. So get that diverse buy-in, and you want as well that ideally want to be working with a company that values knowledge implicitly as a mission critical asset. If the company culture values knowledge as a critical asset, then they're going to be doing the right things, both in terms of human sharing of knowledge and the systems that are going to support them. And finally, I think, you know, the world is becoming a little bit better to connect in terms of the internal infrastructure of businesses. APIs are everything in terms of this connectivity. People are adopting more standards. So I think, Chip, you mentioned standards being important, and they are not just the data model standards and the schema like SCOS, but how the APIs are sharing information, whether we're doing it through JSON or GraphQL. But the more standardization we get there, the easier it is to get systems talking and sharing information.
Yeah. Great point, Steve.
Interesting. Interesting. So as we sort of move forward and hopefully come out of the pandemic and worldwide crisis that we've been in for the last little while, what would you see in the KM world? What do you think people are going to focus on? Dave, you mentioned the failure, and I think experimentation and failure and trying, and best not being the enemy of the good kind of thing. Like, let's get it out there. Let's try it. Let's involve as many people as we can. But if it doesn't work, let's learn from that and move on. It's the that after action learning that that CAM is famous for. Is what do we learn from that? How do we move forward? And I'd like each of you to just to tell, what do you see coming out of this last little while and moving forward? Chip, do you want to start this time?
Sure, Jane. So I'm thinking digital is here to stay. If anything, the pandemic has taught us we can work online. Secondly, I feel that that what's going to happen is this digital world is just going to continue to evolve. One of the things I've learned from several of our customers is agile processing is really key. So you were talking about, and it was, I can't remember, it was Scott or David talked about, try it. If it doesn't work, change it. That's an excellent methodology. And with agile, you can have very quick, turnarounds, and you can do stand-ups, you can look at things, and you have to make decisions based on data that you have as well. And that's what I loved about Jay's part about this is combining this all together. But don't be afraid to be agile and make some mistakes, but be able to recover from them quickly.
Yeah, that's great. I'm so happy you mentioned that, because Dave Snowden will actually be talking a little bit more about agile on Thursday. So thanks for that lead in, Chip. Scott, how about you, moving into the future?
Yeah, I think two things are happening that are really relevant to KM. There's the large volumes of content that are being posted because we're all remote, right? I mean, even transcriptions of these Zoom sessions are producing more of this unstructured data. There's a lot of the big data, trend continues. And then there's the great resignation that somebody mentioned, where people are kind of walking out the door. Have they left behind their expertise in some way? Hopefully they have, for the sake of the organization. So I hope when, as we go into this hybrid model where some people are going to go back, some people aren't, we continue to feed the beast, right? Continue to use digital. I think Chip's right. That's not going to go away. And I think we need dynamic solutions, because if it doesn't scale and it's not dynamic and it takes a lot of time to kind of, organize things sort of manually, it's not going to work, right? You need the technology and the solutions that are going to scale to be able to sort of help keep these things organized and identified and classified, so that the information can be found and leveraged and used, and the information that maybe shouldn't be found can be dealt with from a governance standpoint, right?
Good. Dave, how about you?
I think I'll throw in the phrase "human in the loop," because I think that the post as we come out of a pandemic, what do I want more? I want more face time. I want more face-to-face meetings, which we're not having yet. But we are learning many more ways to interact digitally and rely on more digital interaction. But to the topics I was specifically talking about, which is machine processing of content to basically get better metadata on that content to improve its findability. Yes, we are getting more sophisticated with technology, and there is AI and there's machine learning, but I'm always extremely cautious about overemphasizing AI and machine learning, because there are no silver bullets. The human effort has to be put in somewhere. So in machine learning, it needs to be really put in to getting the training sets right. And so the human in the loop, whether it's in that AI solution or however it is in rules-based solutions, the human is really important and will never go away.
I'm glad you mentioned AI again, too, because our final keynote on Thursday at the end of the day is about AI and ethics. So stay tuned for that. And meanwhile, Jay, how about your final comments about moving into the future and what we need to watch for?
Yeah, so thanks, Jane. And I agree with Chip and Dave and Scott. As I mentioned in my talk, I said RX equals DX. So the prescription is digital transformation, which is DX. And I think that trend's going to continue We'll have to learn creative ways of, dealing with now our virtual and online environments and how to foster cross fertilization and collaboration in that environment. I do some work also in the AI space, and I heard an interesting talk by Stuart Russell. He's at Berkeley, and he and Peter Norvig wrote the seminal book on AI. I think I used it as a student, and he said that he thinks in the next 2 to 3 years we're going to hit a wall with AI, and we need to develop other approaches to what we're doing, right now with machine learning techniques. So that was kind of telling. And then the focus that Dave brought up with human in the loop, as related to AI, there are a number of universities at Stanford. They have an Institute for Human-Centered AI, and actually Colby College just got $30 million for an Institute for AI. We know in Dave's neck of the woods at Oxford, Stephen Schwarzman put up about $300 million to have an Institute for AI ethics. And here in the US at MIT, there's the Schwarzman College of Computing with a focus in AI and ethics. So we still have a lot to go, but I'm optimistic. And I think we can contribute as a KM community to forging ahead and leveraging, off of some of these advances coming down the pike.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate all of your thoughts and insights and comments. It's wonderful. And it's great to be able to interact with you as we start off our KM World conference and move into our exhibit hall where Dave and Chip and Scott will be able to talk further with you. You can do a almost face-to-face, digital face-to-face, let's put it that way. And Jay will be in the networking area again to talk with people who might have other questions or comments or want to know more about your multiple books that are out there, Jay. So enjoy the rest of the day in the taxonomy bootcamp or KM streams around culture, learning, and digital workspace. And we will see you for tomorrow's keynote first thing. Have a great day. Bye.